June 4, 1942, 1,300 feet above the Pacific Ocean, 200 miles northwest of Midway Atoll, Lieutenant Junior Grade Kiyoshi Ogawa felt his Mitsubishi A6M0 shudder as American bullets tore through the fuselage. The engine coughed. Black smoke poured from the cowling. He had seconds to decide: stay with the aircraft or jump. The cockpit filled with acrid fumes. He pulled the canopy release, felt the wind rip at his flight suit, and threw himself into empty sky. He reached for the ripcord, pulled hard. Nothing happened. If this story grabbed your attention, hit that like button right now. Drop a comment telling us what World War II Pacific battle you want us to cover next, and subscribe because we're bringing you the real stories that history almost forgot. Now let's get into what happened when that parachute refused to open. The Battle of Midway was supposed to be Japan's decisive victory in the Pacific. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto had planned the operation for months. The Japanese combined fleet would strike the small American base at Midway Atoll, draw out the remaining U.S. Pacific Fleet carriers, and destroy them in a single engagement. Japan would then control the Central Pacific, secure a defensive perimeter stretching from the Aleutians to New Guinea, and force the United States to negotiate a peace that recognized Japanese dominance. The plan was complex, ambitious, and fatally flawed. American cryptanalysts had broken Japanese naval codes. They knew the target, they knew the timing, they knew the order of battle. When Kiyoshi Ogawa and his fellow pilots launched from the carrier Hiryu on the morning of June 4, they flew into an ambush. Ogawa was 24 years old. He had graduated from the Eta-jima Naval Academy in 1939, trained as a fighter pilot, and joined the carrier air group aboard Hiryu in 1941. He had flown combat missions over China, gaining experience against poorly equipped Chinese aircraft. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, Ogawa was part of the second wave, strafing American installations and engaging the handful of American fighters that managed to get airborne. He had survived. Many of his classmates had not. The Imperial Japanese Navy had lost 29 aircraft at Pearl Harbor, but gained air supremacy over the Central Pacific, or so they believed. The Mitsubishi A6M0 was the most advanced carrier fighter in the world in 1941. It could outclimb, outturn, and outrange any Allied fighter. Its maximum range of 1,900 miles meant it could escort bombers deep into enemy territory and still return to the carrier. Its two 20mm cannons and two 7.7mm machine guns provided devastating firepower, but the Zero achieved these capabilities through extreme weight reduction. It had no armor protection for the pilot. It had no self-sealing fuel tanks. A single burst of gunfire could set a Zero ablaze or kill the pilot instantly. Japanese naval doctrine accepted this trade-off. Maneuverability and range mattered more than protection. A skilled pilot in a Zero could avoid enemy fire, and Japanese pilots were the most skilled in the world. They trained for years, accumulating thousands of hours of flight time before seeing combat. They were professionals, and they knew it. Ogawa had expected the Midway operation to follow the same pattern as every previous engagement. Japanese carriers would approach undetected. Japanese aircraft would achieve surprise. Japanese skill would overwhelm American resistance. The Americans would retreat or die. This had been the pattern at Pearl Harbor, Wake Island, the Philippines, the Dutch East Indies, and the Coral Sea. Yes, the carrier Shoho had been sunk at Coral Sea, and Shokaku had been damaged, but Yorktown had also been heavily damaged. The exchange rate favored Japan, or so the intelligence officers insisted. What Ogawa actually experienced on June 4, 1942, was chaos. The first Japanese strike against Midway Atoll encountered fiercer resistance than expected. American fighters, obsolete Brewster Buffaloes and Wildcat F-4Fs, attacked a formation. They were shot down in large numbers, but they disrupted the attack and delayed the return to the carriers. More critically, they alerted the Americans to the presence of the Japanese fleet. When Kiyoshi Ogawa and his fellow Zero pilots returned to Hiryu to refuel and rearm, they found the carrier task force under attack by American torpedo bombers. The attack was slaughtered. Torpedo Squadron 8 from USS Hornet lost 29 of 30 aircraft. Torpedo Squadron 6 from Enterprise lost 10 of 14. Torpedo Squadron 3 from Yorktown lost 10 of 12. Zero pilots, including Ogawa, shot down the lumbering TBD Devastators before they could launch their torpedoes. It seemed like another victory. Then, the American dive bombers arrived. SB Dauntless aircraft from Enterprise and Yorktown attacked while the Japanese carriers were refueling and rearming their aircraft. Bombs and aircraft crowded the flight decks. Within minutes, 3 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, were burning wrecks. Only Hiryu remained operational. Admiral Tamon Yamaguchi, commanding from Hiryu, immediately launched a counterstrike. Ogawa was among the Zero escorts. The strike found Yorktown and hit it with 3 bombs, leaving it dead in the water. Ogawa shot down 2 American fighters during the engagement. He was becoming an ace. He might survive the war after all. But the Americans found Hiryu. A second wave of dive bombers from Enterprise attacked in the afternoon. Ogawa and the other defending Zeros were outnumbered. They shot down several attackers, but bombs hit Hiryu. The flight deck erupted in flames. Returning aircraft had nowhere to land. Ogawa had fuel for perhaps 30 more minutes of flight. His options were to ditch next to a friendly ship and hope for rescue, or head towards Midway and ditch closer to land. Neither option was good. The Japanese had no air-sea rescue capability comparable to the Americans. American submarines lurked in the area. American patrol aircraft would strafe survivors in the water. He had seen them do it.
The decision was made for him when American fighters found his group of Zeros. A running dogfight developed. Ogawa's combat skills kept him alive for several minutes. He shot down 1 Wildcat, damaged another. Then tracers stitched across his engine. The Sakai radial engine, already running hot from extended combat operations, began to disintegrate. Metal fragments punched through the firewall into the cockpit. Hydraulic fluid sprayed across the windscreen. The engine ceased. The propeller stopped. Ogawa was flying a 3,704-pound glider at 220 knots. He had perhaps 60 seconds before the Zero stalled and began the spin that would kill him. Pull the canopy release lever. The canopy slid back. Wind roared into the cockpit. Release the seat harness. Unbuckle the radio cord. Disconnect the oxygen hose. Push himself up out of the seat. The wind tried to slam him back. He braced his feet against the seat and pushed harder. He cleared the cockpit. The Zero's tail passed inches from his head. He was falling. Standard procedure called for delaying the parachute opening until reaching 500 feet to minimize exposure to enemy fire. But Ogawa was already below 2,000 feet. The ocean was very close. He reached across his chest and grabbed the D-ring of the parachute ripcord, pulled hard, felt the pins withdraw, waited for the shock of the canopy deployment. Nothing happened. He looked up. The pilot chute, the small drogue that pulls the main canopy out of the pack, had deployed but tangled in the shroud lines. The main canopy remained in the pack. He was falling at terminal velocity, approximately 120 miles per hour. Japanese parachutes in 1942 were manually deployed, not spring-loaded like later models. They required the pilot to physically pull the canopy from the pack if the pilot chute failed. Ogawa grabbed the shroud lines and pulled. The canopy partially deployed, a twisted mess of silk that provided minimal drag. He was still falling too fast. The ocean rushed toward him. He had time to take one breath and brace for impact. Impact with water at terminal velocity is similar to impact with concrete. The surface tension of water becomes effectively solid at high speeds. People have died from falls of 60 feet into water. Ogawa fell from over 1,000 feet. His legs hit first. Both femurs fractured, his spine compressed, his head snapped forward. He didn't remember hitting the water. His next conscious moment was underwater, disoriented, in pain, unable to tell which direction was up. The partially deployed parachute wrapped around him like a shroud. He was drowning. Survival instinct overrode the pain. He fought against the silk, found an opening, pulled himself through. His Mae West life vest had been under his parachute harness. When the canopy deployed and wrapped around him, the vest had been pulled askew. He struggled to right it, to position the inflation tubes where he could reach them. Japanese Navy-issue Mae West vests were inflatable bladders worn across the chest and secured with straps. They had no automatic inflation. The pilot had to manually blow into tubes to inflate them. Ogawa took a breath of air, found the inflation tube, and blew. The vest partially inflated. He blew again. It inflated more. His head broke the surface. He gasped, vomited seawater, breathed, vomited again, breathed. The ocean around him was empty. No ships, no aircraft, no other survivors. The battle had moved on. He was alone. The sun told him it was late afternoon, perhaps 1600 hours. He had no survival kit. The kit was supposed to remain with the seat when the pilot bailed out, but equipment could not always be recovered in the chaos of evacuation. He had his flight suit, his Mae West, his knife, and his service pistol. The pistol was useless now, soaked with salt water. The knife might be useful if he encountered sharks. The flight suit would provide minimal protection from the sun. The Mae West would keep him afloat. The water temperature was approximately 72 degrees Fahrenheit, warm enough that hypothermia was not an immediate threat, but cold enough that extended exposure would sap his strength over hours. His fractured legs made it impossible to kick, to swim, to maneuver. He could only float and drift with the current. Pain radiated from his legs, his spine, his head. He had suffered a concussion during impact. His vision was blurred. He knew he had internal injuries. Blood in his urine confirmed kidney damage. Without medical treatment, he would die. The question was, how quickly? Japanese naval aviators received survival training, but it focused primarily on jungle survival after crash landing on tropical islands. Ocean survival training was minimal. The expectation was that downed pilots near the fleet would be rescued quickly by destroyers or float planes. Pilots downed far from the fleet were considered expendable. The Japanese Navy had no dedicated air-sea rescue organization. No submarines stationed along strike routes to pick up survivors. No PBY Catalinas searching for downed aircrew. Japanese pilots who went into the water far from their carriers usually died there. Ogawa knew this. He had 6 hours of daylight remaining. If a Japanese ship didn't find him before dark, he would spend the night in the water. He might survive until dawn, probably not longer. Dehydration would kill him. Exposure would kill him. His injuries would kill him. Sharks might kill him sooner.
The symbolic object in this story is water. The ocean surrounded Ogawa in every direction. Billions of gallons of water, but none of it drinkable. A human can survive 3 weeks without food, 3 days without water. Drinking seawater accelerates dehydration by forcing the kidneys to use precious body water to process and excrete the excess salt. Ogawa was surrounded by water and dying of thirst. Water also represented the strategic reality of the Pacific War. The Pacific Ocean covers 63 million square miles. It is larger than all the Earth's land masses combined. Controlling this ocean required naval power, air power, and the industrial capacity to replace losses faster than the enemy could inflict them. Japan had won the early battles through superior training and tactics, but Japan lacked the industrial capacity to sustain a long war. The United States could replace the carriers lost at Midway. Japan could not. The ocean that had seemed like Japan's defensive barrier was becoming its prison. As the sun declined toward the horizon, Ogawa felt his strength fading. Shock from his injuries gave way to a creeping numbness. He stopped feeling the pain in his legs. This was not a good sign. It meant nerve damage, blood loss, the cascade of system failures that precedes death. He thought about his family in Osaka. His parents had been proud when he graduated from Edajima. His younger brother wanted to follow him into naval aviation. Ogawa had tried to discourage him. The war was not going as the newspapers claimed, but his brother insisted. Duty, honor, the emperor, the words that defined their lives. 6 hours after hitting the water, as the sun touched the horizon, Ogawa saw a shape on the water. A ship. He waved, a feeble gesture that sent spikes of pain through his fractured spine. The ship kept coming. It was Japanese. A destroyer, probably searching for survivors from the carrier battle. He waved again, shouted, though his voice was barely a whisper. The destroyer altered course. Someone had spotted him. They pulled him from the water using a rope sling, laid him on the deck. A medical corpsman examined him and started shouting orders. Ogawa understood that his injuries were severe. Both legs broken, possible spinal fracture, concussion, internal bleeding, but he was alive. The destroyer's surgeon did what he could, setting the leg fractures and wrapping them in splints, administering morphine for pain, treating him for shock and dehydration. The ship was heading back to Japan. Ogawa would survive,
arrive to see home. But survival came with a cost. His legs healed badly. The fractures had been compound, bone fragments driven through muscle tissue. Without proper surgical intervention in the critical first hours, the bones set crooked. He would walk again, but with a limp and chronic pain. His spinal injury left him with permanent nerve damage. He could not pass the physical requirements to return to flying status. In January 1943, he was medically retired from active service with the rank of full lieutenant. The transformation this experience produced was profound. Ogawa had entered the war believing Japanese superiority was cultural and spiritual. Japanese pilots were better because Japanese spirit was stronger. Japanese tactics were superior because Japanese training was more rigorous. Japanese victory was inevitable because the emperor's cause was just. The 6 hours in the Pacific Ocean destroyed those beliefs. He learned that technology mattered. His parachute failed not because he lacked courage or skill, but because the equipment was poorly manufactured. Japanese parachutes had a known failure rate. Japanese Mae West vests were inferior to American designs. Japanese survival equipment was inadequate because military procurement prioritized offensive weapons over defensive equipment. The Americans had better rescue procedures, better survival gear, better medical care. These advantages translated into higher survival rates, which translated into more experienced pilots returning to combat, which translated into tactical superiority. Japanese spirit could not overcome American logistics. He learned that industrial capacity mattered more than warrior spirit. Japan lost 4 carriers at Midway. The United States lost 1, but America could build carriers faster than Japan could build theirs. The Essex-class program would produce 24 carriers during the war. Japan would complete only 1 fleet carrier after Midway. The mathematics of production determined the outcome more than any individual battle. Most importantly, he learned that his own government had lied to him. The newspapers reported Midway as a victory. Radio broadcasts claimed a great Japanese triumph. Official communiques declared 4 American carriers sunk and only moderate Japanese losses. Ogawa knew the truth. He had watched 3 carriers burn. He had been shot down by American fighters that were supposed to have been destroyed. The Japanese people were being told a story that bore no resemblance to reality. This was the impact of being 20,000 feet up in the air.
After the war, Ogawa rarely spoke about his experiences. Japan's post-war culture discouraged veterans from discussing the war. Most Japanese wanted to forget. Those who did remember focused on their suffering, not their aggression. Ogawa understood both. He had suffered. His legs hurt every day, but he also knew what Japanese forces had done in China, in the Philippines, across the Pacific. He had been part of it. There was no honor in that, no matter what the propaganda had claimed. The epilogue of this story extends far beyond one pilot's survival. The Battle of Midway cost Japan approximately 3,057 men, 4 carriers, 1 heavy cruiser, and 248 carrier aircraft. Only 36 pilots were lost on the carriers when they sank, and 74 were shot down in combat. Most Japanese aircrew were rescued, but the institutional knowledge, the combat experience, and the quality of training represented by those pilots could not be replaced. Japan lost 110 experienced naval aviators at Midway when accounting for the pilots killed and those like Ogawa who were too injured to return to combat. These losses devastated the carrier air groups. The United States lost 362 men, 1 carrier, 1 destroyer, and 144 aircraft at Midway. But American industry and training infrastructure could replace these losses within months. By mid-1943, new American carriers with better trained air groups were entering service. Japanese training programs, already inadequate, were further reduced as the need for pilots grew desperate. By 1944, Japanese naval aviators were going into combat with perhaps 100 hours of flight time. Their American opponents had 600 hours. The quality gap became a slaughter. The water that nearly killed Ogawa represents this larger strategic reality. Japan was an island nation, dependent on seaborne trade. The Pacific Ocean was both highway and barrier. Controlling the Pacific required protecting sea lanes, maintaining supply lines, and ensuring that merchant ships could deliver oil, food, and raw materials to Japanese industry. As American submarines and aircraft cut these supply lines, Japan slowly starved. By 1945, Japanese civilians were subsisting on 1,200 calories per day. Factory production dropped 70% from lack of raw materials. The Navy couldn't fuel its remaining ships. The Army couldn't move its divisions. Ogawa survived the water. Japan did not. The nation that had launched the war to secure resources and territory ended the war occupied. Its cities burned, its people starving, its industry destroyed. The empire that seemed invincible in December 1941 surrendered unconditionally in August 1945. The transformation was total. The larger truth this story illuminates is that war is not decided by individual acts of courage or skill. Those matter. Ogawa's survival was testament to his training and will to live, but survival rates, industrial production, and logistical capability matter more. A nation that can rescue its downed pilots, repair its wounded, and return them to service will eventually defeat a nation that cannot, regardless of individual valor. Ogawa's 6 hours in the Pacific Ocean were a microcosm of Japan's war. He was alone, unsupported, relying on inadequate equipment, rescued only by chance. Japan was similarly isolated. Fighting alone against an alliance was combined industrial capacity that dwarfed its own, relying on equipment and tactics that had been adequate in 1941 but were obsolete by 1943, surviving only because the Allies chose to defeat Germany first. The water that surrounded Ogawa was the same water that carried American supplies from California to forward bases, the same water that American submarines used to hunt for Japanese merchant ships, the same water that isolated Japan from its conquered territories. Control of that water determined the war's outcome more than any battle, any weapon, any ideology. In his final years, Ogawa spoke occasionally to school groups about his experiences. He told them about the failed parachute, the fractured legs, the 6 hours drifting, the destroyer that saved him. But he focused on a different lesson. He told them that war was not glorious, that propaganda lies, that industrial capacity matters more than fighting spirit, that violence rarely achieves its intended goals, that 6 hours alone in the ocean taught him more about Japan's fate than all the official briefings and newspaper reports. He died in 1987. At age 69, his legs still causing him pain 4 decades after they shattered against the Pacific Ocean. He was cremated, his ashes scattered over the sea where he had nearly died. The ocean that had tried to kill him became his final resting place, a return to the moment that defined his life and revealed the truth about the war he had fought. If you found this story powerful, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more untold stories from World War II. Drop a comment telling us what Pacific War topic you want us to cover next. These stories matter, these lessons matter, and we'll keep bringing them to you.